Hi, I'm Lisa. I've been teaching English as a second language for over a decade now. I want to talk to you today about tenses. One particular tense, the present perfect tense. It is a rather important tense in English, and it does give non-native speakers some difficulty. I do want to say first that as native speakers, we don't know the names of tenses. So if you ask any native, what's the present perfect tense? They have no idea. And if you don't believe me, just ask any native. We don't know the names of tenses. We just use them naturally, as native speakers. But as learners, of course, you have to learn the tenses in a different way than a native did, because we learned it growing up and we use it more naturally. The other reason tenses are very difficult is because it uses concepts or ideas that don't exist in your native language. So that's why tenses can be a little bit difficult. So today I'm going to talk about the structure of the present perfect tense, and it actually is a very simple structure, but the problem comes with the use of the tense. So I will talk to you today about the use of the tense. Also, we'll talk about these two words, for and since. They're important to use them properly, and non-natives often don't know how to use them, and it's important to use them with the present perfect tense, and we'll see why. So let's jump right into this video lesson, and we'll talk about the present perfect tense and why this particular tense is actually used interchangeably with the past simple tense. So do not stress about verb tenses, and do not stress about grammar in particular if you are an intermediate student. When it comes to conversation, you know enough grammar to conduct a decent and successful conversation. So that's never an excuse why you don't speak more, because you're worried about the tenses. So don't go crazy with the tenses, but let's examine this one particular tense, the present perfect tense. Let's jump into the video lesson. The present perfect tense is a very interesting tense and a very useful one. But try not to translate the present perfect into your native language. Just try to accept the concepts of this tense and learn to think present perfect. You'll soon learn to like the present perfect tense. So the first thing, how do we make the present perfect tense? How do we recognize that we're in the present perfect tense? Here is the structure, and it is a rather simple structure. You always have a subject, then you have, I call it the helping verb or the auxiliary verb. It's always have or has, right? It has to agree with the subject, but it's always in the present simple tense, always. And then you have the main verb, and the main verb is always in the past participle form of the verb. Remember, the past participle, it's created by just adding ed to the end. That's usually how we create it, but of course we have exceptions and we have words that are irregular. So we actually might not just add an ed. And if you're not sure what those verbs are, then you'll have to brush up on that. If we make it a negative form, we simply put the not. It always goes between the auxiliary verb and the main verb. When we create a question, we simply exchange the subject and the auxiliary verb. That means we just switch them around. They switch places. We'll see some examples of that here. So we have the subject, I, the helping verb have, and the past participle form of see, which is seen, and then et. You have eaten mine. She has not been to Rome. We have not played football. And here's the question. We always start with that helping verb. Have you finished? Have they done it? Just a note about contractions. You do have to remember in spoken English, which is very different than written English, in spoken English we use contractions a lot. So you should learn to get accustomed to saying them and use them. So when we speak using the present perfect, we will often use the contraction form of the subject and that helping verb. So instead of I have, natives will often say I've. Instead of you have, native will often say you've. Remember, it's informal. When we speak, we often use informal speech unless it's a very formal situation or a formal writing that you're doing. Usage. So how do we use the present perfect tense? So we know how to recognize it, we know the structure, but how do we use it? And that's usually what the problem is. Well, you always have to remember there is a connection between the past and the present. So put very simply, the present perfect tense is something that started in the past, continuing to the present, or affecting us presently, or recently finished in the present. So we use it to talk about, we'll put them in 3 categories: experience, change, and a continuing situation. First, let's talk about experience. So when we have an experience from the past, we are not interested in when it happened. We're not interested in the specific when. We only want to know if you did it, if you had that experience. So here are some examples. I have seen an alien. He has lived in Bangkok. Have you been there? We have never eaten caviar. So you see the structure is what we just talked about, but they're all experiences. And why is it affecting us in the present? Because it's a memory. We have a present memory of it. It's in our head. So the action or whatever happened has been completed in the past, but it does affect us now because it's an experience. So there's always a connection with the past and always a connection with the present. Second category was change. We use it for change when we have new information. For example, I have bought a car. So what happened in the past? What went on in the past that's different today? Well, last week you didn't have a car. Now you have a car. So that's why you would say, I have bought a car. Here's another great example. John has broken his leg. So the listener, when they hear has broken, obviously they're thinking, yeah, so yesterday or in the past he had a good leg. Presently he has a bad leg. So we would say John has broken his leg. There is a change. Although he broke his leg in the past, and you might think, oh, shouldn't I be in the simple past? But is it affecting him presently? Yes, it is. And isn't it a change from previous? Yes. So that's why we'll be in the present perfect tense. Here's a question form. Here's another example. We start with have or has in the question. Has the price gone up? So why am I in the present perfect tense here? Because something changed. The price might have been $1 last week and now it's $2. So we would say, has the price gone up? Has there been a change? Okay, we use that present perfect again for that continuing situation, a continuing situation. So let's take a look at this one. So that action started in the past and continues in the present and will probably continue into the future. You have to think of this concept as a situation, not an action. Think about it as a situation. I think this is where students sort of go off the tracks, is because they're just thinking, well, has the action been completed? Don't think in terms of action here. Think in terms of a situation. So like a job. Let's look at the example here. I have worked here since June. So what happened in the past? Well, you got hired in the past. The situation started in the past. They said, welcome to the company. You are now still at the company. You have a job, thank goodness. So it continues up until now, and you hope you will continue to have a job in the future. You hope it will continue, and it probably will. You know you're a good worker. So you would use the present perfect. You wouldn't use a simple past. You'd use the present perfect because, again, starting in the past, a situation affecting you presently and will likely continue into the future. We have the other examples. He has been ill for 2 days. Okay, again, started in the past 2 days ago, right? He was fine. He got sick. Now he's still sick. And then how long have you known Tara for? So let's look at this for and since. Okay, we're going to move forward here. I often hear this mistake, very common mistake with for and since, and students get confused. Put very simply, use for when you're talking about a period of time or range. 5 minutes, 2 weeks, 6 years. We use since to talk about a point in the past, that specific point, specific time, 9 o'clock, January 1st, Monday. So let's look at some examples, and you can see that. I have been here for 20 minutes, not since 20 minutes, for 20 minutes. It's a range. I have been here since 9 o'clock, a specific time. John hasn't called for 6 months. So you're starting to see that pattern, right? Okay. Please remember, for can be used for all the tenses, so we use for pretty frequently. Since is usually used with present tenses, so just keep that in mind. Perfect tenses, not necessarily just present perfect tenses, but perfect tenses only. Finally, does it really matter if you're in the present perfect tense? What if you use the simple past? I mentioned earlier that natives will often use present perfect and simple past interchangeably. Why? Well, let me go back a second. I will tell you there's no native that will correct you for using the wrong tense, saying, hey, you should have been in the simple past, not in the present perfect. Yeah, that's wrong. No, sometimes natives won't even notice. We don't really pay attention to tenses very much when we speak. Unless the idea isn't clear, we pay more attention when we write. And this is why we don't pay as much attention to the present perfect tense compared to the simple past. Here's an example. Let's say I was talking to you when we both lived in Australia, and you asked me, Lisa, how long have you been in Australia? How long have you lived here? I would likely answer the first example. I lived here for 3 years. Is it grammatically correct? No, it's not. I should really be in the present perfect tense. Why? Because I moved here 3 years ago and I am still living here in Australia. So I have lived here for 3 years, I would tell you. That's grammatically correct. But a lot of natives will not use the present perfect tense. We will use the simple past. I lived here for 3 years. It's not over. It's not a completed action or a completed situation. But this is the reason. Does it make a difference here in terms of the idea? Is the idea lost? Do you understand what I mean if I said to you, I lived here for 3 years? Yeah, you perfectly understood that idea. You know I'm here in Australia. I told you for how long, for 3 years, and you know I'm still living here. So again, a native won't even notice that you didn't use a present perfect tense because the idea is clear, and that is my point. Don't panic about tenses when you speak, especially the present perfect tense, as long as the idea is there. Often you can be in the simple past when you're speaking. When we write and write emails or anything formal, we do pay attention more to tenses. But when we speak, our interest really is making sure that the idea is clear. So hopefully you are a little bit better equipped to use that present perfect tense. You won't be afraid to use it. You understand what it's used for and why we use it. But also know if you switch to the simple past, often that can work well too, as long as the idea is clear. And guess what? If the idea is not clear, what will the listener do? What will the other person do? They will ask you a follow-up question to be clear. Thank you for listening.